Start spreading the news.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
New York, I love you. I love New York.
What's going on, people? Welcome to another episode of the Off the Ball podcast with me, your host, Chris LeBron, and we are on the Nothing But Net radio channel on Dash Radio. And on today's show, man, it's almost that time. It's NBA draft time, and I'm so excited because this is what kind of got the show going, was all the draft talk from last year. It felt like last year's draft season was like 2 years. So I'm excited, and I got one of the best in the biz, man. One of my favorites. I read all his stuff. He is one of the best. I had him on the draft show last year, and I'm super excited to have him on here one-on-one. I got Nathan Grubel of Draft Deeper. Nathan, what's going on, my brother?
Nothing much, man. I'm excited to get into some of this talk with you, man. It's been a long time coming. Yes, sir.
Yes, a long time coming. Happy to have you aboard the Off the Ball podcast. So first of all, how you doing, man? How's everything going?
It's been a hectic draft season. I'm not gonna lie. It's been really tough cutting down the amount of prospects that I've been watching and try and solidify some draft tiers that I'm going to be coming out with on the show in the coming weeks. I have it down to about 70 guys. So I got to cut that down to a 60 that I'm going to fully break out into tiers. And you can call it a top 60. I don't really operate with the whole quote unquote big board thing over at Draft Deeper. But at the same time, you got to have some way to solidify and vision how these guys are going to come into the NBA, what level they're going to be producing at. So that's really been a lot of hard work. But other than that, just the busy life, man, podcasting regularly like you, having some people on. I just had Jordan Hall for a prospect interview over on Draft Deeper. That was really fun, and I'm going to be having Matt Coleman on this coming week as well. So that I'm really looking forward to. That if you're going to ask me about a Nathan Grubel top 5 or my guys at some point, I'll probably throw him in there, even though he might not get drafted. But it's, in my opinion, he's got to be like a top 60 guy because of what he's proven at Texas over 4 years. So I'm excited what we're doing. Yes,
I'm excited. So talk to me about that process. A lot of people like putting out big boards and do tiers and other ways. So what is your way? How do you like to break down your guys?
So I've had to do big boards in the past, both with some of the private work that I've done, but that I did like a big board top 60, and I broke that down at Draft Deeper last year. And the only reason why I shy away from doing like a big board system, I don't like putting a number next to a guy and having to come out and be like, oh yeah, this guy, yeah, he's definitely better than this guy, like by a number, right? Like I don't like ranking guys like that. But if you throw them in like a tier, right? Like how I want to do it is I want to break everything down by like their second contract, what kind of level I see them being at their second contract. So that's kind of a more fair way, in my opinion, on how to do it. While at the same time, if you put guys in tiers like that, you're definitely getting an idea of the level of talent that we are projecting them to have. So.
Yeah, because I always look to like doing big boards also, but it seems like I'm, for this year, the tiers, it's definitely you get a better feel of how you like guys. You can your blue chip guys, the guys you think you could be like a borderline all-star, your guys who are going to be, really good, role players and guys that are on the fringe. So I think that's a great way to break down guys, is that tier base. And it seems like a lot of people in the draft community seem to be doing a lot of the tier based format now.
Mine's a lot more simplified. I don't have like 15 tiers, but I have. I definitely have a few. I'll probably come out with like 6 different tiers.
So obviously last year was a wild year, right? Especially evaluating. I mean, you probably got tired of talking about the 2020 class because it felt like the process was a year long. Like it was so long. So how did you go? What did you take anything away as far as evaluating players from last year that you brought into this year?
I think it's keeping an open mind about a lot of these prospects, while everything that I thought evaluating last year's class is also coming into play in terms of remembering my process, how I view evaluating these guys, which is looking for how can they impact the game right away, day one in the NBA. What are the other skills they have that might not necessarily translate from day one, but you've seen examples of them being there. You know that they're there. And then what are the weaknesses? What are the things they can get better at that could potentially take away from them getting minutes, taken away from them on the court? So it's really like those three things I like to look at when I'm evaluating players. And that has really hit home in this class, because if you break down prospects that way, we have so many guys in this class, just like last year, who I believe have 1 to 2 translatable skills. And it's really going to be interesting where they go, what kind of rotations they're drafted into, and how many opportunities they're given to showcase those skills right away. Like, I see a completely loaded first round of guys who can come in and make a positive impact right away. Just like last year, we thought the depth was really what shined through last year. And while I can definitely see more quote unquote MVP level talent at the top this year, or at least a lot more sure as to what we feel this year than last year, but the depth, I believe, is still there. And I think that once you get past like the first 4 guys, there are a lot of guys that come into play at 5. At least for me, that's how I feel about it.
Okay. And that, like you said, like after that 4 to 5, it seems like after that is kind of a crapshoot, because I'm sure you've seen like the consensus top 5, right? And then after that, it is like, okay, there's everyone's 6 is different. Everyone seems like they have a different 6.
It's a crapshoot, but not in a negative way.
Yeah,
I think it's a crapshoot in a positive way, because there's, like I said, there's so many of these guys that bring skills to the table that you know are likely going to translate. It's about what you project as being more valuable in terms of those skills that are already coming in, and how you're going to evaluate how you think they can develop moving forward. What other skills do they have that you think can be in play by year 3, 4 when they're getting ready for that next contract?
Yes. So I wanted to dive into your going into the college season, year 10, and then how much is it differentiate, after the season. So for you, what any big changes from going into the season, year 10, and then looking after the season ended?
So I think the 2 of the biggest things for me, guys who have fallen out of like consensus top 10s, were Brandon Boston out of Kentucky and Zayer Williams out of Stanford. Yep. 2 really exciting wings who both brought, to me, different skill sets to the table. Zayer Williams obviously has deep range on his three-point shot, can be a little bit of a playmaker off the bounce, but has his concerns in terms of his frame, how he's built, how you think he's going to be able to add on weight when he gets to the next level, and was inconsistent at Stanford. Now, he had some injury issues, and that definitely held him back a little bit. So you don't want to knock him down too far, but he definitely fell out of like a consensus top 10 range for me. And then Brandon Boston had his struggles at Kentucky, where he was potentially like a number 2 or number 3 guy, like coming into preseason. He shot up everybody's boards because of how deep his bag was in high school, the number of different ways that he could score off the bounce and create his own shot. But when he got to Kentucky, he lost a lot of his confidence, I believe, because he wasn't able to finish at the basket with regularity. He wasn't able to get to the rim with regularity, and that kind of stripped away everything else about his offensive game. But you saw him get a lot more of that confidence back in the second half of the year, and he's one of those guys. I did end up putting up a profile on him where it's like, how much stock should you put in that first half of the year versus that second half of the year? Not only just with having to fit into the college game as a freshman and adjust, but also the impacts that COVID had this year. Yeah. Not being able to come in, get those preseason workouts with your teammates, not get that kind of chemistry built from immediately preseason into the start of the season, to the fact that all of that took time. How do these guys adjust in a situation like that? That made it hard for so many players.
I think that's it's a big thing, is adjustment to this weird season, right? Yep. It wasn't a conventional season. You didn't have a regular training camp. You didn't have a regular season with fans. I remember, I don't know if you listened to it, but Cade was on with JJ Redick, and he just like, yep. I can't interact with no one. There's no fans. Like, it's like I dealt with it, and he did about his thing, but that's a weird. I mean, when you sign up to play college at Kentucky or Oklahoma State or Duke or whatever, you're expecting, big crowds, and you feed off that too, right? So that's another thing, is feeding off that energy when you're down and you're making that run. You feed off that energy from the crowd, and for a lot of guys and a lot of teams, especially Kentucky, it seemed like that really hurt them a lot this year overall, because we saw a lot of disappointing play from Kentucky overall.
It did, but at the same time, that also breeds opportunity for guys who are going to come in with that level of energy that they bring it themselves. Who can shoot up a board. Like, for example, I think the top three of like Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, and Evan Mobley was kind of already set preseason, and you didn't really see that changing. But that fourth guy, where that could have been Brandon Boston Jr., I think Jalen Suggs shot up the board and took his spot for that exact reason. So
agree. He did take his spot, but it's just crazy how, like you talk about BJ Boston, he was that top 5 guy, and then he couldn't put it together, and he had some moments, but just very inefficient, right? It just very inefficient. Had some, like, I remember, I think you had mentioned this in your piece on Boston about the game against, I believe, South Carolina towards, I think, like the second to last, where you saw like he started the game off really good, then had his downs, right? I think he probably missed like 4 in a row, then got back up. And you saw that confidence with his catch and shoot, his ability to bet to the basket. And I know it was against South Carolina. They're not a good team, but I felt like, okay, maybe he's starting to feel it, even though it's late in the season and the season's done, right? Kentucky's not even going to make the – but I felt like that game was kind of like a moment where I was like, okay, maybe he's starting to figure it out.
I have a feeling you're a Knicks guy. We can talk about other fits that might be for the Knicks, but I just have this feeling that he's going to end up on the New York Knicks because
Nate, the Knicks Twitter will go, including myself, we will go if we can get him out there.
The Kentucky pipeline is now incredibly strong, but also you guys are a playoff team, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to likely be a playoff team next year. I don't see you guys coming off that train anytime soon.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But
anything can happen and then be in the Knicks world. So, let's hope.
I think that's also not the worst of situations for him to be in, because a playoff team can afford to be more patient with him. They don't need like a top 10 guy to come in right away. I think that if you're willing to be patient, maybe he plays in the G League for some stints. If you let him get that confidence back and kind of prove it at some high level that he can take over games like he did in high school, because that ability is still there. And you see him. I mean, Simon Rath posted that photo the other day of a ripped BJ Boston. He doesn't look like the same player he was at Kentucky. You know that Clutch Sports is already putting him to work. So, I think that he still has that top 10 level talent. It's in there. It might just take a little longer than we initially expected, but that's a guy who has fallen, but you can still get incredible value. And that's what I'm talking about, the depth of this first round. There are guys like him, like Zayer Williams, who have maybe fallen, but just give it a little bit of time, you can still get excellent production out of them. And those were really like my biggest changes from preseason. And Suggs was a top 10 guy for me. He wasn't a top 10 guy preseason for like everyone. But Suggs really shot up the board in a positive way too. And that was, I guess we can consider that a big change as well. But other than that, not really a ton of changes for me. I still have guys like Jalen Johnson, Scotty Barnes, Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer. Those guys are still entrenched in there. And obviously Jonathan Kuminga is there as well. So a lot of that didn't change for me, but yeah, some changes.
What's your thoughts on the G League guys? I mean, obviously very polarizing, G League, the Ignite team, first season, obviously they changed the whole landscape, allow guys, giving the guys in state allow the opportunity to play pro basketball, with professionals, around there. Jack was on the team, Brian Shaw was the head coach. So what was your thought on, a lot of the G League guys? Obviously, you got Kuminga, Deshaun Nix, Todd, Jalen Green. What was your thoughts on those guys and how they played this year?
I love the experience overall, and I loved it because they brought in veterans and a head coach who knew how to win at the NBA level.
I love the setup. The setup was perfect because a lot of people assume like, all right, you're just gonna put a bunch of young guys. I'm like, okay, that could be kind of disastrous in a way. But the fact that they mixed in, the vets with the veteran coach to help them understand what they're gonna get ready for at the next level was perfect.
Yeah, they picked the right people to come in and help those young guys learn how to win. And that was really the biggest standout thing for me. Even though they lost that first game in the playoffs and they were out against Raptors 905, they still made it to a playoff spot. Mm-hmm. That's incredible to me, just given the fact that they relied so heavily on guys like Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga. Kuminga had the highest usage rate out of anybody on that team. So the fact that they were able to make it that far on their backs really spoke volumes to me.
Yeah, it was a great, I love the idea around it. Keep the guys in. Hey, you don't want to go to college. We don't want you to go overseas. Let's figure out something and work in the States. But what about guys like, we know Jalen Green, we know Kuminga. Those guys are locked in, top 5, top 6 guys. But what about the guys like Isaiah Todd and Deshaun Nix? What's your thoughts on those two guys?
Isaiah Todd got great exposure in that environment. And I think that not only was he able to showcase some of the shooting versatility that was evident if you had ever watched him play a basketball game before, but some of the skill he brought to the table in terms of his passing as well, his short roll playmaking, his ability to find somebody off the bounce, his defensive activity, his motor. When I'm sure you listened to Chad Ford's podcast with Brian Shaw talking about how Todd was probably their most consistent guy out of any of them in practices. Like that means something. That says to an NBA team that this guy isn't necessarily just a raw ball of talent. He can come in and potentially make a contribution right away. And when you pair that level of skill with his athletic ability, probably one of the top 5 athletes in this entire draft class, like that's a guy you have to value more highly. And I had the Draft Act guys on my podcast, Corey Taluba, and I had Albert on as well. And we were talking about
you got a bunch of goats on that one.
I wanted to have them on because I wanted to talk about the G League guys specifically. And we talked about Todd, and our takeaway was like, we've had so many positive things to say about him. Why is he not valued higher on everybody's boards? Like what is there really to nitpick about him? He can certainly polish some of those skills and get better at them, but the foundation is there. And if you're talking about guys with a high ceiling, usually you wrap up skill plus athletic ability. Like, he's checking so many boxes for a guy his age. Like, why is he not higher? And then as far as Deshaun Nix is concerned, he still has a lot of talent. I think a lot is wrapped up, obviously, in his body and how he's able to stay in shape. Now, we've seen videos since the G League season where he looks like he's in much better shape than he was in that G League bubble, which is definitely a sign, something positive to point to. But I don't know, man. I get concerned. Like, it's one thing if you're like a big man and you have to be careful about what you're eating and how you're keeping your body and staying in shape. But for a point guard, that concerns me a little bit. I don't know if I necessarily want to wrap myself up in some of those concerns with a point guard, but there's nothing really negative to say in terms of his ability to run the floor, run an offense. His shooting is a little questionable. He did knock down some spot-up jumpers in the G League bubble, but there's some question marks with him, more so than Todd. I would definitely be much higher on Todd than I am Deshaun Nix, and I think that Isaiah Todd has to be entrenched in like that top 20 range.
Yeah, and with Nix, he got that dad bod, so maybe that's probably why I like him a lot. He's got that dad bod, so it's probably why I like him a lot so much. But obviously, it's going to be intriguing with see where those guys go at, and a lot of talent over there. And but who was your biggest, riser, and then who was the guy who dropped the most for you, during this season?
Guy who dropped the most for me, it probably was Brandon Boston. He's gonna be at the tail end of that tier that I'll call, like, are they like the last starter in terms of, are they like the 5th guy in a really good lineup, or are they like a spot starter, like a 6th man? I'm probably gonna have Brandon Boston more towards the tail end of that tier. Riser, guy who I wasn't as high on, didn't know if I was going to be as high on him this late into the process, but someone who's really surprised me is Jared Butler. And like, I have him locked into, like, if I had a top 10 pick, he has to be on my radar.
Final Four MVP.
The reason why I say that is it's not that he's like this crazy run and jump athlete or anything like that at the point guard position, but he reminds me in the sense that, and I'm not comparing these two players necessarily, but when Donovan Mitchell was coming out of Louisville, he wasn't necessarily talked about as like a top 10 guy in a lot of places, but you go back and you watch his game and you're like, what can he do on the basketball court? Like, honestly, like, why is he going to fail? And you really couldn't point to anything specific in terms of his skill level and then combined with some of that athletic talent. But more so in his skill level, I feel the same way with Butler. Like, I just don't see a scenario in which he fails. And I see so many positive contributions he can bring to the table. Like, I'm probably in an extreme minority where I actually think Jared Butler has a pretty strong chance to be a star guard in the NBA, not just like a contributor on like a good team, but I think he can legitimately be a star. Because you just look at what he can do on the ball, playmaking for others, pick and roll scoring, his off the ball ability as well, his ability to move without the basketball and create separation and get open for easy 3-point shots. He can play make on the ball, and he can also play next to somebody else who can create plays for others. So I just think his offensive versatility, he's one of the most competitive guys that we have in this draft class. You mentioned it, Final Four MVP that was on display for Butler, for Baylor all year. I don't see a scenario in which Butler fails, and that's why I view him a lot higher than maybe some other people do.
Do you like him more than Davion right now?
I do. I've liked him more than Davion all year. I think Davion's one of your guys, right?
I love Davion.
The reason why I'm higher on Butler than Davion is because when you watch how Butler operates an offense, he is so crafty with his ability to start and stop, change speeds, his handle. Davion is an impressive athlete, more so than Butler, but I think Davion plays at one speed far too often. And you don't usually see – now, that doesn't mean he can't pass or make plays for others. He really improved his decision-making overall last year as opposed to before. But if you can't necessarily change speeds and be able to operate in more than one pace at the NBA, that's going to be exposed. If you're always just operating at one speed, fast, those guys don't usually tend to develop that innate ability to start, stop, play at different tempos. That's usually not something you learn. That's generally something that you come up with, right? So that's why I'm a little more concerned about Mitchell. But at the same time, he's still somebody who should be valued in the draft because he is that spark plug kind of guy. Like if you're bringing him, that's what I like about him, is that I think he's a good instant offense type of guard. Between the shooting ability that he definitely improved this year, as well as his other ways to score. But also, if you bring him in that role, usually those instant offense guys, you're questioning how they can impact the game defensively. And you're not questioning that with Davion Mitchell whatsoever.
Exactly. 100%.
So, like, if you're bringing him in off the bench, he can also kind of captain a defensive unit for that second unit. He can be that point of attack defender who just puts absolute pressure on anybody. So, do you value that more than what Butler can potentially bring to the table? That's definitely an interesting debate to have to both of those guys. But I just think Butler's overall mastery of the offensive game to me speaks more than the potential value that Mitchell can bring.
Yeah, and that's why I love Mitchell so much, is that even if the offense never comes along, the defense to me is always going to be there because you can't teach he's just a pit bull. No matter what, he's gonna be that. So that's why I've just loved it, because he's just, and the improvement I saw. He made a huge leap. From last year to this year. As far as the passing, the playmaking, and all that. Still got to work on some shooting things, but improved as a 3-point shooter and all that. Free throw shooting got improved and all that. But both of them, Butler and Davion, that's the reason why they won the national championship. Big reason why they did their thing against Gonzaga. With that juggernaut over there. So definitely two guys that definitely will see being called in the first round. But who's giving you the toughest? Who's giving you the toughest? You can't sleep at night because you just can't figure this guy out. Like it's just so hard to figure out this guy.
Toughest guy who I can't really figure out. You know what? It's James Bouknight. It really is, because I see people like Mavs Draft on Twitter have him as high as like 5 on their boards.
Yeah. I've seen him as high as 5. Yep.
And I'm struggling to figure out if he's like definitely a lottery level talent. I would have had him like a lottery level guy like before the year started, but I'm concerned about his ability to make everyone else around him better. I'm concerned about his shooting in particular. You look at his shooting metrics on Synergy, both on his jump shot number in general, but also his catch and shoot numbers are like really bad. Not even just like bad. They're like really bad. So for all those moments where he creates a shot on the ball, he's able to go to his little step back in the corner or whatever the case may be. There's also plenty of other concerns where he's not as efficient on those play types. And if you're going to be investing a lottery pick in somebody who's primarily just, cutting to the basket, scoring off handoffs, those easy play types, but he can't necessarily do some of those other things in spades when we talk about isolation, shot making, catch and shoot ability, why are you investing that high of a pick in him? You know what I mean? I think the wild card for me with him is how much defensive value he's going to bring to stay on the floor. Like, my comparison for him all along has been like, can he be a more athletic Gary Harris? That's really been my comp for him all along, because I think Gary Harris isn't necessarily someone you see as like this isolation scoring dynamo at the guard spot, but he can score in enough ways combined with his defensive impact where he's not a bench guy. He's definitely a starter on a good team. It's just how much responsibility do you ultimately give him with the ball? Now, Book Knight can look like a freak athlete at times, so that certainly gives him a higher ceiling to work with than just saying he's going to be Gary Harris. But I don't know if I'm investing like a top 10 pick in that kind of a player. Like, Harris wasn't a top 10 guy when he came out of college. He was in the back end of that lottery. So
yeah, especially Book Knight's been one of, like, I was big on him early, because the scoring, and then as he got, like, he didn't shoot the ball as well. The defense worried me. It felt like he was a turnstile at times, so those are things that would worry me. And even though he can score, so you do need that, something off the guy off the bench. But he's another guy I'm trying to figure out too, and I'm sure you're trying to wrap your head around them as a lot of people are, because super talent, can do stuff off the dribble and all that, but there's a lot of things that are really concerning with him. So we got to try to figure that out with him.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about a lot, but I want to talk about something that's near and dear to me, a team that's near and dear to my heart, and that's the New York Knickerbockers. Made the playoffs, Nathan. So round of applause, right? They finally made the playoffs after 8 years. It's been a struggle, but obviously we got bounced in 5, so can't be too happy. Struggled to score the ball, pretty much, right? The defense was good, couldn't score the ball. So they got a few picks this year. They got Dallas's pick, 19, 21, 32, and 55. Nathan, what do the Knicks got to target in this draft?
You know what they need. They need a point guard. They need somebody who is a lot better than Alfred Payton.
Since Linsanity.
So the question is, what type of point guard do you think they need? Do you need somebody that you think just comes in and is able to make other guys better? Do you need somebody who can do a little bit of everything, or somebody who is just primarily a scoring threat at that position, and you keep the playmaking in the hands of guys like Randall and Barrett? What do you think they need? Because depending on your answer, I'll give you a guy then who I think they should target.
And you mentioned just that Randall, right? Because Randall played a lot of points. Eventually, Randall was our best playmaker this year, a best point guard, and he had the ball in his hand a lot. So finding a point guard that's going to be able to mesh with him, to me, is the number one key. If you could find someone that can and not Randall, it seemed like he wore down towards the end of the season. In the playoffs, he just wasn't that same player that we saw, made him an all-star. So finding a point guard that would mesh well with Randall, and I think that would be, because I don't think RJ can be like that secondary playmaker right now. I felt like he's just not ready to. We saw it at Duke too, some of that playmaker, but it feels like in the pros we haven't. I don't know if he's not being allowed to do it or he just can't do it yet right now. So finding someone that can be that, work with Randall, I think is very key. But because if you take the ball away from Randall, how effective is Randall? So to me, it's very tricky to figure out what kind of point guard they need, to make this thing go. Because they need a point guard, because they need the pace of play was slow. They need to play a little faster type of basketball. Get those guys in transition like Obi, RJ, and if Mitch is back, those guys, get them in transition. So I don't know. You tell me, what kind of guard do you think they need?
I think you guys need Jared Butler more than anybody. And there is a chance that he can slide, man. Like I know that I'm giving him like this really high lottery grade, but at the same time, I don't know if NBA GMs and scouts are necessarily thinking on my wavelength. So
he's in that range, right? From everything you've seen and what I've seen, he's in that late teens to late 20 range.
He can be, absolutely. So I think if he's there, I think you nab him, because he can play with virtually anybody on your roster. Like, even if you want to go really small backcourt at times and you want to go him and IQ, You can go him and Barrett. You can obviously he can mesh with Randall. He can be a target. You can have him and Randall involved in a pick and roll. Have Randall making plays off the short roll. Then Butler spreads the floor, can shoot the 3-ball. He can obviously move without the ball. I just think he meshes with your offense the best out of some of those other guys. Like I think the other guy who can be in that conversation is Sharif Cooper, but if you draft Sharif Cooper, you're building the offense exclusively around him. And you pointed out, what is Randall if he can't necessarily have the ball in his hands at least enough, right? Mm-hmm. You're taking away a lot of his value and the value that he proved he was able to have as an all-star this year. So like, I don't know. You tell me, which one of those two you think you would rather have?
I think Jared Butler would fit a little bit better.
I could be an excellent fit. I think you guys need him the most more than anybody else. And he's mature too. He's not afraid of the bright lights. Coming into Madison Square Garden, he can handle that responsibility being the point guard from day one. So
that's something you need. That's something you need, because that garden could be very intimidating, and I saw what Quickly did, right? It did not bother Quickly at all. Nope. Especially, obviously the season, not a lot of fans. And then when we got the playoff time, it didn't seem to bother Quickly that there was, 15,000, fans, and he was just right in his element. So getting a guy like that can take that, because it comes, hey, when you shoot 1 for 10, you're going to get booed. And when you shoot, 6 for 10, you're going to get cheered. So be able to understand those emotions and deal with that, I think Butler can handle. I mean, he's a national champion, and experienced player too, getting someone who comes in with a few years under his belt in college, I think would, fit into Knicks perfect. If we come, what's a combination you think the Knicks would, a Knicks fan would be happy with these 2 first rounders if they keep them? Obviously, they could trade them and all, but let's say they keep them both. What do you think is a combination that you think Knicks fans and the Knicks and Knicks organization would be happy with?
Well, the other name that comes to mind, I'll throw a third guy out for the guard spot in a second who's a wild card, but a guy who they should target with like a second pick should be someone like Chris Duarte, who can come in and impact the game right away, can spread the floor in the wing. He's somebody that can come off the bench, and you're not necessarily – doesn't have as much quote-unquote upside as some of these other guys, but you're not concerned about what you're getting. And with the Knicks being in playoff position right now, you just need guys who can come in and contribute right away, regardless. So that's why Duarte is being valued as like this top 25 guy. He can come and impact the game right away. So I think that he would be a great target for the Knicks. But I'll throw out a third name for that guard spot. A wild card to me would be Trey Mann. A lot of people really like Trey Mann. He's been skyrocketing up boards. I question if he's definitely a full-time starting point guard. I don't know how much volume and responsibility you want to necessarily put on his shoulders and how much he's ready to do right away. Maybe that's something that comes in time. Maybe that's why you draft him outside of the lottery, maybe towards like the back end of the first, like between like that 20 and 30 range. I don't know how high it would take him, but he's like a wild card. If you want to shoot for the stars and you're looking at the best of both worlds between like a Butler and a Cooper, maybe you shoot for somebody like Trey Mann and hope for the best.
I like Trey Mann a lot, so I'd be definitely. Those are all to me. I'd be happy with any one of those guys. Like I said, to me, the Knicks got to come away with a guard. They don't have to be a primary, but at least be a secondary ball handler and playmaker that can do some stuff, because it was lacking, and I think it hurt them. In the playoffs and overall, even during the season. Yeah, we had a great season, but it was still like the Elfrid Payton's, Tibbs kept going back to that. And it was just like, Tibbs, I was just like, hey, let's see give IQ the shot. Let's see what he can do. I know he's not a lead guard in that way, but
do you want him to be the starter? Because I think IQ's like perfect off the bench. Like he's that third guard. That's what I think he's perfect. No,
I think IQ in that third guard role coming off the bench, that spark plug is perfect. I think that's the perfect role. So that's why, to me, they got to find that lead role, because right now you don't have that. You don't have that because, you're assuming, Elfrid's not coming back. We don't know what Derrick Rose situation is going to be, if he's going to come back or not, because he might command a nice chunk of change this offseason, with his great season, finished third in sixth man of the year voting. So if you lose both of those guys, you don't have anyone. Your lead ball handler is Randall, and it's like, I do like him when he has the ball in his hand a lot, but you want to have him fresh down the stretch, because I felt like him having the ball in his hand so much. Yeah, he did a lot with it, but it kind of affected him towards the end of the season where he kind of looked a little fatigued. And by the time we got to the playoffs, he was just blown up, and we didn't see the same Randall.
Well, Atlanta just kind of threw him out of the regularity in terms of how he wanted to score the ball. Like, he's at his best either getting to the basket or spotting up for a three-point shot. And they had him taking these wild off-the-bounce mid-range shots, and he was just completely out of his element to the point where I was like, this is not the Julius Randle that I know. It's been usually it was bully ball with him. Now he's been able to extend his shot out beyond the 3-point line, but he's never been this like mid-range type scorer. So Atlanta did a great job throwing him out of his element, and he'll definitely look at all that film and he'll get better at his game this offseason. And Thibodeau will figure out how to have him avoid those situations next time around. But yeah, that was a little. I felt bad for my man Julius Randle. I'm not necessarily like a Knicks fan, as you know, but I do love me some Julius Randle. So
Atlanta got healthy too at the right time.
Yeah, they did.
They did.
I had your team picked, man. We were talking about before we hopped on. I had Knicks in 6. That was really the only series I've been off on this whole time.
Yeah, they'll figure it out, and we get to the we'll figure this thing out, get some free agents, and figure out the guard play, and we'll see. But like you said, the guys you mentioned,
I'd say Mitchell would be in there too, but apparently he's not making it past the top 10. Apparently, like every mock I see from like anybody who actually gets intel, he's like from like the Raptors at 7 to whoever would have like that 9th or 10th pick. So. Yeah,
so I mean that would be a guy I would love to, especially on that defensive end, but. We'll see. But the Knicks, they got 4 picks. We'll see what they do. Going to be interesting if they keep it, move down. We'll see. They got a lot of options to do, but could get some serious talent with the 19 and 21st pick, and even they got the 32nd pick in the second round. You can get yourself a nice player in the top of the second round too. So interesting to see what they do. Interesting with it. So let's get into some of your favorite Euros. Who's some of your favorite European players? Because this to me, I love watching the European guys play. I've been big on this Euro class. So for you, who are some of the guys that you like?
The 2 guys I like the most are probably Alper and Şengün, and then Usman Garuba are probably the 2 that I like the most. Garuba, I definitely see as like a lottery level talent. I don't know how much he's going to necessarily impact the game offensively, but at the same time, yeah, he's a defensive monster. One of a few guys I think in this class, this is very rare company to be in. I don't use these words lightly, but I do mean them. I think that in time he could potentially guard like 1 through 5 down the road, which is insane. Like those guys do not grow on trees. So if you can find somebody who is that athletic and disciplined enough on that end to do that, plus his motor, his ability to run the floor in transition, he's a monster on the glass on both ends. Like if you're telling me I'm going to get like a 10 points, 10 rebounds kind of guy for a long time, that's a really valuable player to have on your team. And that is someone who's worth being taken in the lottery. Just because he's not like this 20 points per game scorer doesn't mean that you can't spend a lottery pick on him and he shouldn't be valued for your team. So that's definitely why I value Garuba in that lottery level. And then Şengün. Şengün's one of my guys. Like if I'm making like a top 5 team, yeah.
He's so good though. I feel like if this was 10 years ago, he'd probably be a top 5 pick because his game in the post is just beautiful.
Historic production at his age over in Europe. And it's not just that, it's also I tell this story sometimes. So when Kristaps Porzingis, not to bring up bad memories with you.
You can't. Knicks fans. Oh, that's like saying let's say like a bad word to a Knicks fan. Like when you say Porzingis.
I wasn't necessarily as high on him as like this top 5 guy when we were going into his draft. But what really changed my perspective was seeing some of those workout videos and him just shooting threes with no consciousness, his effectiveness shooting the ball from all different spots on the floor. And you see some of these workout videos with Şengün, like these pregame highlight videos where he's making like step back threes and like all this crazy stuff off the bounce. And it's like, why is this guy not in play like after 5? Like to me, like if I'm sitting there,
we mentioned that before the show, and I was like, okay, I wanted to get into that, mention that because you see him in that some late lottery, but like end of the first round because people are so worried about his defense and all that, and he's kind of a modern day like a post guy, and that's not really where we're at in the NBA. But talk to me about that because you got me going, you got me thinking about outside top, after the 5, that you think he's in play.
We could talk about what he can't do, and I think that's pretty expected, right? He's not this quick mover in space. He's not defending in space. You can't throw him to guard somebody on the wing all the time. But that's really not what you should ask him to do, anyways.
No, it's not exactly. I'm not going to ask him to guard Kevin Durant and LeBron James.
When we're talking about that stuff, I think we're nitpicking, right? But if you look at what he can do. He can score out of pick and roll sets. He can get involved in the pick and pop game. He can stretch the floor for others. He, as you mentioned, his low post game, his footwork in the post, he really reminds me of Sabonis, man. That's really been my comp for him. His high low game, working with another big man, you see it on his team. His high low passing is absurd. His big to big pass. Whenever I see big to big passing from someone his age, I sit back in my chair and I'm like, ooh, that.
I see you getting excited, man. I see you getting excited.
That's not something you see every day from somebody. You know what I mean? So it's the amount of skill that he brings to the table at his age. Why set a cap on his ceiling? Why can't he be as good as somebody like a Sabonis? Or I was having an argument on Twitter earlier. It's people want to throw out I'm pretty confident that he can't reach the level of Jokic. Well, why not?
But I'm so glad you brought that up. Why do we why do we say though he can't be Jokic? Did anyone think Jokic would be Jokic? Well,
that was one of my arguments.
I
threw out that when Jokic was coming out into the NBA, if you would have said that Arvydas Sabonis was a high-end ceiling comparison for Jokic, people probably would have said, oh, he can't be as good as Arvydas Sabonis. Sabonis is one of the best passing big men of all time. Mm-hmm. Well, spoiler, Jokic is the best passing big man of all time.
Exactly.
He's an MVP. So MVP. Why do we set limits on people who are 18 years old? So that's my whole process. And to build his case out, You could run through as many guys as you want from that 6 to 14 range. I'm not sure I'm sold on any of them any more so than I am Şengün. I think I view a lot of guys from that 6 to 15 range as all in the same tier as a starter on a really good championship team, a near max guy. I have him in that conversation with a lot of other different players. So that's why he's been one of my guys that I'm just so high on.
Yeah, I remember watching, I think it was Rafael Barlow. Shout out to Rafael Barlow. He had he's high on him too, and he did a little video on him, and I think this was sometime last year, whatever it was, and I was like, oh, I like him. And then I started watching more of his stuff. I'm like, okay. I'm everyone's tripping over his, he's just in the post. I don't think he's in the first round pick because of that. I was like, and like you mentioned before, why are we capping him off that he's just a post? He can extend. He can get better. Guys, guys could get better, right?
Do you think he's small? That's another thing that I see on Twitter too. People think he's small. The dude's 6'10", 240.
That's not small.
But how is that? That's not small. If you're 6'10", 240, you could get your butt in somebody in the post. You could back him down. How's that small?
Yeah,
I don't understand that whatsoever. Why can't that be a center in the NBA?
Nah, I don't get that. But
if he was 6'8", I'd understand people's arguments. But he's 6'10" with a 7'1" around their wingspan. That's not small.
That's teams are going to drool over that, and just he's someone that I think late lottery in that range, and like you said, maybe even high. We don't know. We're still getting more intel and seeing where guys could potentially go, but it's how do we know he could be really, really good? I just hate when people just say, well, this guy can't be this good.
I have a feeling he's going to Toronto at 7. That's who I think is going to go there. We know Masai Ujiri loves international players.
I was just saying Masai, okay.
They need a big man, so why not?
Desperately. They desperately need one.
Why not?
Why? Yeah, exactly. Why not? And I think, we see in a lot of drafts, we're going to get that one shakeup. Everyone has the consensus. We're going to get a shakeup, I believe. I know everyone thinks 1 through 5 is going to be the tip, the consensus 1 through 5. But hey, Alper, he might shake things up because he's one of my guys too. I know that's your guy. He's one of my guys too. He's so much fun to watch, and I'm looking forward to see. Like I said, I love this international class. Is there anyone else you like in the international class?
So there's those two. Obviously, Josh Giddey is on everybody's radar. I think because a lot of people view him as a point guard. I don't view him as a full-time point guard. I think he's much more like that Joe Ingles type player, which he knows that comparison's out there. He actually likes that comparison himself a lot. But that's really the player that I see him as. And I don't know if I'm necessarily drafting that guy in the lottery, but obviously he's right there in that international class. And then Vrens Blienberg, who I don't really see in a lot of people's top 30s outside of like the draft Twitter community. But him being that 6'10", potentially another jumbo size playmaker with ability, like I need to see a little bit more from him shooting the basketball outside with consistency. But everything else he can do off the dribble and just the amount of talent that he uses out, like why is he not somebody who's more talked about in the first round and in like media consensus versus just draft Twitter? So those are kind of like the guys that I value the most out of this international class. But there are some other names out there as well.
Yeah, and I had friends on the show I think last month, and I talked about like being the 6'10" and then having point guard skills with a 7'1" wingspan is something you don't see a lot.
I think like Gavoni and Schmitz didn't even have them in like their top 100 or something like crazy like that. I think I remember tweeting about it too. I'm like,
you're right.
Schmitz is one of the best in the business, but like, how is this guy not a part of your top 100? Like, what is he missing? Like, forget that you and I might have him in like a first round, but goodness gracious, if he's not in the top 60, I don't understand the case behind that. He's got to be a drafted player. He's definitely someone that should be in everyone's 100%. Top 60 just on his skill alone. I mean, what he can do. Yes, he's got to work on the shooting. He's got to work on getting a little stronger. But those are things you can that once you get to the States and you got that program, those are things that can easily be fixed with him. You know, but 6 foot, you can't teach 6'10", 7 foot wingspan, and already has, can handle the ball like a guard and has a good playmaking skills. So like, I definitely need to see him more on more people's boards because I've seen him outside top 100s. It's like, okay, 102 is like, all right, just put him in the 100 at least. 102, like, come on, like, you can't tell me that. But he's definitely one of the guys I like a lot, and I had him on last month, and he's a teammates love him too. Just a good guy, unselfish. So I think teams are definitely gonna love that with friends. So all right, give me a sleeper. Give me a sleeper, Nathan. No one's talking about. I don't know if nobody's talking about this guy.
Or very minimal talk. Very minimal talk about this guy.
Shout out to Coach David Thorpe, who we had this conversation off the air. When we were talking about some different prospects, but Raekwon Gray, I don't think has gotten enough buzz out of Florida State. He's a very, very unique player. I've compared him. I think the best comparison I can come up with, Coach Thorpe thinks he's PJ Tucker 2.0, as in like a better version of PJ Tucker, which is that's praise in and of itself. That should definitely get top 30, top 40 buzz at the least.
That's a 10-year plus vet.
It is. I've compared him more to Boris Diaw. But like either way you want to slice it, we're kind of thinking about the same type of player, right? PJ Tucker was better defensively, but offensively you're thinking about the same kind of player. But Gray is like sneaky athletic. He's like this 6'8", 250 some pound like house. Yeah, and he can get up, he can get off the ground, he can move in space, he moves his feet really well laterally. Things you wouldn't expect from somebody his size, and he can contribute to the game on both ends of the floor, make plays for others. He does need to improve his shooting. He needs to be a more consistent outside shooter, but I think the form looks good. If that's really the only question mark I have for him and he can do all these other things on the floor, gosh, he's got to be certainly in like that top 40 range at least, if not higher.
Yeah, those Florida, they be breeding these monsters at Florida State.
Yeah,
like built out like Greek gods. Like, it's like, what is he? 6'8", 6'9", like 240.
He's like 250. He's like, no, he's 250, 260.
Oh, he's even bigger.
Like, he's bigger than that. Yeah, and that's what, like, when you watch this guy jump and go up for a dunk, it's like
Florida State football could have used him at tight end.
Right? Exactly. So like, why is he not being valued more? It's like it's that I call it sneaky. It's not sneaky when you actually watch him on video, but like just looking at him, you wouldn't expect this guy to be like a run and jump kind of athlete, but he is. It's scary.
Yeah, that's another potential steal in this draft. I definitely like him a lot too. Everyone talks about Barnes, but definitely needs more love. All right, so let's go into our final thing. Nathan, and you've been great. We're on the Nothing But Net radio channel on Dash Radio. Nathan Grubel of Draft Deeper is on with me, one of the best in the business. Go on draftdeeper.com, right? That's your site.
Check out draftdeeper.com. Subscribe to us anywhere you get your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter at DraftDeeper. Yes, sir. Yep.
Also on the YouTube too. So check them out there. All right. So give me your top, your starting five. You're all Nathan Grubel 5 for this draft. Who are your guys?
Jalen Suggs is right there as one of my guys, 100%. I don't have him as like a top 2 kind of guy. I think Cunningham and Jalen Green occupy those spots for me. But if I'm a GM picking at the top of the draft and I'm not selecting Suggs, I'm not sleeping well at night, just because I think he's just going to win games at the NBA level. We've talked about Butler enough. We've talked about Şengün enough. Those 3 are locked in. I'm going to keep Jalen Johnson in one of those spots. Okay. I've been burned before in terms of not having enough off-the-court information when having a guy very high in the draft. Josh Jackson was a guy who I was very high on when he was coming out, and I didn't know enough about the off-the-court stuff, and he had some things he's had to work with. Thankfully, he's definitely made some strides in his personal life. He's really turned around his basketball career. So
becoming a solid player now.
That's a blessing, but yes. I've been burned that before. But just looking at the raw talent, I think Jalen Johnson did a lot of top 5 draft pick level things, even in his short time at Duke. Mm-hmm. And I think it was done off of just raw ability. Like when you watched him back in high school, you're thinking this is a very high IQ guy, somebody who can play make for others at his size. When he came in and was trying to impact the college game, I didn't think he really showed that high of IQ to me. Mm-hmm. So when he was able to have some of those monster games that he did off of just pure raw talent, that speaks volumes to me. And so I still think he needs to be valued very highly. And then the 5th spot would be Joel Ayayi out of Gonzaga. He's definitely one of my guys. Listen, man, he's not going to be a star, but tell me what he can't do from a role player perspective to impact winning at the highest of levels. He is that garbage pail, that war room type of guy that you just want on your team. And I think you'd think that defense would be his strong suit, just given the type of like 3-and-D moniker he has over him. He actually needs to work on his defense in a lot of aspects, but just being that guy who can handle the ball for you, be that secondary level playmaker, you have to respect his 3-point shot. You can't just leave him open in the corner. And then if he gets better defensively, like he's another guy you could look at as being a timely contributor off the bench, but potentially be like that spot starter / 5th guy on a team later down the line. And that's how I would view him in like a tier system, that 5th, 6th guy, spot starter kind of guy.
Yes. All right. So you got Suggs, Butler, Şengün, Jalen Johnson, and Joel Ayayi as Nathan's 5 guys. Those are his guys. Those are his guys. And Nathan, man, this was a pleasure having you on, buddy. This was a lot of fun, man. Pleasure having you on the show.
Can I get your top 5 before we leave?
You want my
your
5?
Top 5? I want your top 5.
My 5. Okay, so I put this out on Twitter. So okay, 5. I got let's see. I had it written down here. I think I have it somewhere here. But off the top of my head, my guys, Davion Mitchell.
Yep.
Okay. Kuminga. I'm a big Kuminga guy.
Okay.
Kuminga. Şengün.
Yep.
Brens.
Okay.
And 5th. Who was my 5th? Who would I put as my 5th? 5th. Let's go. Josh Christopher. There we go.
I was literally just going to say before we parted ways, don't sleep on Josh Christopher. That's like a name that everybody in your audience should go back and study for sure if they haven't.
Yep. So he's
going to rise.
Oh, yeah, he's going to rise. The athletic ability, another guy that, up and down injuries and all that, but to me, once we get closer to the draft, I think he's going to get back up, skyrocket. But that's my 5. That's Nathan's 5. One of the best in the business, Nathan Grubel, Draft Deeper. Thank you for coming on the show, buddy. Where can people find you on social media before we sign off?
At Draft Deeper on Twitter. Follow us there, please. We're almost at 600 followers at the time of recording this show. So anything your audience can do to help me out there.
Oh, no, we got to get you up there. We got to get you to 1K. We'll get you to 1K before the year.
We got to get – that's my goal, 1K around like the end of the draft. I would definitely love to be there. So. Oh, yeah, for sure. So we got to get you up because, like I said, I'm not just saying this because you're on the show. You are definitely one of the best in the biz. I read all your stuff. You break down the game beautifully and, can't wait to have you back on. You're going to be on when we get into the mock draft. When we do the mock draft, definitely going to be on. So you're going to see a lot more of Nathan on the podcast. But on that note, I'm Chris LeBron, Nathan Grubel. Make sure to find me on social media, Off the Ball Pod on Twitter, Off the Ball Podcast, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Check out the show
on all podcast platforms and on the Nothing But Net radio channel on Dash Radio on Mondays noon every week. Also catch me on the 2K post-game shows Wednesday through Saturday after the conclusion of all the games. So on that note, guys, be well, be safe, take care, and NBA draft's coming soon.